So files have permissions. Files have owners first. A file has an owner. An owner is the person who created the file. The person meaning the user who created the file, so the username of the person who created the file. And files can also have permissions, access permissions. Now, the permissions generally come in three categories: read permission, write permission, and execute permission. Read permission means you can read the file. Write permissions means you can write data to the file. Execute means you can run the file. If it's a program, you can run it. So read, write, execute. And the initials, the letters you use for those are R, W, and X for each one of those permissions. Now, different permissions can be assigned to different users according to the type of user. So there are three categories of permission, three groupings of people, or groupings of users for every file when you're talking about permissions. So you can talk about permissions for the user. The user is always referring to the file owner. So the user permissions are the permissions for the file owner. Note that the user can be prevented, like the user might prevent himself from writing to it for safety's sake or something like that. So you can have user permissions for the owner. You can have group permissions that are permissions for a group of users. So we haven't talked about this, but you can define a group of users. So for instance, say I got two users, me and Joe, Ian and Joe. I can make a group that's called my group, and it just contains Ian and Joe. And then that group can have permissions, right, for accessing this file. So you can have user permissions, group permissions, and then you can have other permissions, which is permissions for everybody else. So these permissions, we're not going to talk about how to change them right now. Let's just talk about how to see them. The way you view file permissions generally is to type ls, ls is a directory, right? ls-l. If you use the -l option, it gives you the long form. And you see all the data about each file. So here, I'm doing ls-l. I got, there are actually 5 files in here, 4 of which are directories. So desktop, IndyCity, Python Games, and TestDir, those are all directories. Test1's a file. They color them differently, but they all have permissions. So the permissions you can see in the leftmost column. So there's a D for the directories. D just designates directory and dash doesn't. But after that, you see 9 characters. 9 characters in a row, and some of those characters are dashes. So let's look at that first file, desktop, for a second, right? If you look in its permission fields, there's a D telling me it's a directory, but then there's RWX, then there's R-X, then there's R-X. So the R, W, and X stand for read, write, and execute. The first 3 characters are the user permissions. The next 3 characters are the group permissions. The next 3 characters are the other permissions for everybody else. So for desktop, what that says is the user can read or write or execute the file, or the directory, in this case the directory, but then the group can only, if there were a group, which there is not, but if there were a group, it could read and execute, could not write to the directory. And the other, which is everybody else in the world, can read from the directory and execute things in the directory, but cannot write to the directory. There's a dash there. Instead of a W, there's a dash. So it indicates they don't have write permission. Now, if you look at that file, test1, right? Test1, a few rows down, the user has read permission and write permission, but no execute permission, which is fine because it's not an executable program. And then the group and the other have only read permission, but no write permission. So that's how you read the file permissions, and you can change those too. We'll talk about those another time. Now, in addition to the user account that we're using like the Pi account. That's the default account. There's another account called the root account. Linux machines all have a root account. Root account has the highest permission level. So the root account has access permission for everything. Key files and directories are only accessible by root. So if you look at Linux operating system, the operating system itself is composed of many files. Okay? There are many files and executables and things that make up the operating system. And so some of these files and directories, some subset of these, are tagged only for root, owned by root, and only root has permission, read and write access permission, or at least write access. This is for safety's sake, because if you start going around and messing with some of these files, you're actually altering the operating system itself, altering features of the operating system. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can ruin the operating system. So some of these files have only root permission, and some of these directories, only root can access them. Now, sometimes you need root permission. You don't want to have root permission in general because it's a little bit dangerous. It's not safe. You know, if you do something in root, it's done, right? If I accidentally delete a file and it's some critical file, if you're not root, it won't let you. But if you're root, it'll let you, right? So root is dangerous to be root all the time. But there are certain cases where you need root permission. Say to install a program. A lot of times installing programs you need to be root, because installing a program requires putting files in all kinds of directories, and certain directories are only accessible by root, and maybe you need to modify I'm talking Windows, you need to modify some file that only root has access to. So maybe installing programs a lot of time you need to be root. Not always, but sometimes. Changing the operating system. So if you want to modify the operating system, update the operating system, install drivers into the operating system, you often need to be root. So there are a set of things that you need to do as root. The way you generally do that is you use a command called sudo, S-U-D-O. S-U is short for switch user. That's a command, switch user, D-O. So you prefix your command with sudo. So let's say I want to do ls. I want to get a directory. I type ls. And that's fine, right? But if I want to get a directory that only root has permission to look at, I want to look at that directory, I can't just type ls, I have to type sudo ls, sudo space ls, and it will do the ls command as if I were root. So it makes sense. So it just applies root permission to a single command, which is a safer way to do it. You don't want to generally become root unless you really know what you're doing.